Okay, hello everyone. Hey, my name is Bhavi, and I'm a program manager with the compliance M365 team. And Kathy, go ahead.
I'm Kathy. I'm also working in Microsoft 365 compliance. And today we're here to talk to you about your top 5 tips and tricks to protect your sensitive data.
And before we talk about these top 5 tips and tricks, I just wanted to figure out, a show of hands, how many of you have used the sensitivity labels over here? Okay, we have a few. What about retention? Records management? And what about DLP? Data loss prevention? Okay, all right. Now to live up to the actual name of the session, so let's go into the 5 tips and tricks. Right? So before we go in, this session is all about the announcements which has come in, and I don't know how many of you have heard about Know Your Data. Know Your Data? Okay, this is good. Okay, we are going to announce Know Your Data right now in this session. The first thing is, every single customer whom we have spoken to, they are not really willing to go and click that button to go set up policies without understanding what data it is all about in our enterprise. And over the past 6 to 8 months, we've been working on this particular solution, which basically brings that view to the customers even before you start setting up these policies so that you exactly know what these policies are going to do. The first thing, what we'd like to recommend over here is using some sort of inbuilt classification methodology. This goes back to how you use your DLP policies, how you set up your DLP policies to protect your data. With respect to warning sensitive information, blocking sensitive information leaving your organization. The second one is using machine learning models, and this is one of the biggest announcements, and Kathy will walk you through a live demo of how machine learning classifiers are built in to the tool and how it's going to help you. The third one is utilizing the content and activity explorer. This is one of our big announcements as a part of this Ignite, and I'll probably have a live demo as well, talking about what this content and activity explorers are all about. And fourth one is, once you know about all these things, how do you go about establishing your protection and governance policies? And most importantly, the fifth point is to ensure that you do 1 through 4, right? Without further ado, let's look into how we think about this problem statement as a whole. The first one is knowing your data, which we just spoke about how you use the tips and tricks. And once you know about the data, how do you go about protecting and governing your data? So let me jump over to a quick demo. Okay. Okay. You will start seeing data classification appear in all your tenants over the next week or so. So we are announcing this as a part of Ignite. And the most important thing over here is you really do not need to set up any policy. This is basically the zero change management effort for any tenancy. As long as you have the right licensing SKU, you go into data classification, it's going to start showing you information about what kind of sensitive information exists in your organization, importantly, and that is this particular information over here. DLP policies work on top of this. So when you have data in SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, we automatically go and scan this data set. It's totally non-intrusive. It's about bringing that insight out to administrators before you go on the journey of establishing your DLP or retention or sensitivity label. The second thing is, okay, fine, I understand my data. Now I want to go set up some sensitivity labels to start protecting my content. What happens then? Well, here you go. You can start understanding exactly how people are using these. There are 2 types of labeling with respect to sensitivity and retention. You can roll out a manual label wherein people go and use those labels to protect or govern the content. The second one is auto labeling. And auto labeling policies are the ones wherein it becomes really tricky. And it's not easy for organizations to basically go in that journey without understanding what kind of data exists. Because with respect to auto labeling, you're always trying to use some sort of regex or pattern matching or large keyword dictionary, and more so machine learning that we would be announcing. And you wouldn't feel really comfortable going into that journey without understanding what kind of data exists in your organization. And another important area over here is, not sure how many of you have used AIP, Azure Information Protection labeling stack, the unified and the classic labeling. If you've done that, great. All your insights are going to show up over here, right here. So you don't need to be going into different portals. From here, we're going to hook up everything for you. And another important announcement that we have is the Activity Explorer. You start seeing things over here as to, the labels are getting applied and files moving over to removable media or network share. All those insights are going to show up over here as well. And this is where, we get into the mix of what's content and what's activity. So let's go into a quick demo of that. So when I want to get into the details of my data, which lives across Exchange, SharePoint, or OneDrive, and the example over here is I'm going to go into SharePoint. You would like to understand, okay, what data is sensitive, what data is labeled with my sensitivity label, and what data is labeled with the retention label, right? Let's take an example. So I would like to look at all the data that I have which have EU debit card number. I can go drill into a particular site and see that, okay, I have these 5 files which have EU debit card numbers present in them. But we do not stop there. What happens with scanning is it doesn't detect just one type. We have out-of-the-box classifiers. We're talking about 100+ types, right, which we scan for. No problem. You click on it to understand what are all the types detected for a particular file. So we get that 360-degree view for a given content. And we do not stop here. And whenever there is a detection for a machine learning model as well, it's going to show up right over here. And one of the key things that we have heard is, okay, I always keep seeing these file names, but that doesn't really help me understand. And administrators, to make the right call, they would like to understand exactly what is this data going to look like. Can I go and see the actual underlying content? You have that as well. So we have in-place native rendering, which is right over here. So we do not take a copy of the data residing in SharePoint and put it in an Azure Blob Store, and then you get access to that. We do not do that. We do issue a live query to SharePoint to get the data rendered right over here, as long as you have the right security permissions. So this is going to be gated as a part of our security permissions over here. Okay, now I understand about the data. If I want to know more about the data, you can always go switch on the file metadata, wherein you can understand exactly what is the content which is matching, what's the file URL, which can give you access to the actual content in SharePoint, who is the user who created, who's the user who modified it, with a lot of information around that. Okay, so let's go into this particular view over here. We spoke about content. Now, what's happening in and around my content? So I'd like to introduce you to Activity Explorer. You would have already seen this as a part of your tenant on a particular pivot, which is retention labeling. Now we are going to infuse sensitivity labeling and all the sensitive data, how they travel in and out of the organization. So that's where Activity Explorer comes in. And one of the key points over here that I would like to point you is, you have a bunch of columns that you can view for any given data, and you can filter down the data based on 30+ categories that we are going to be rolling out in your tenants, right? So let's look at this, right? Let's take a specific use case. I see that, just by spot checking, there are a lot of documents which are going out of the organization without the right protection applied on them. So let's take a step back. Sensitivity label that we have as a part of M365 Compliance Center travels with the document. So we crack open the document, put in the label which protects the document. So if you are a company, right, who's running a business and you want to ensure that your mandate is such that no document which is sensitive should leave the organization without the right label applied, well, you're going to find out these risky activities using the Activity Explorer. And one such scenario that you can see over here is, so this is a business which is basically expanding in Europe, and they have a need to recruit a lot of people. And whenever it comes to recruitment, what happens is people are sending out resumes of the company to vendor firms, right? And what happens during those cases is that, files get copied into removable media, files get printed, so you need to have a very good visibility of all those data sets. And you clearly see that none of these data sets have the right sensitivity label attached on them, which means that this data could be leaking somewhere. So we need to figure out how we're going to solve that problem. And this is where it comes into a very interesting turn of events. We really did not have anything which can figure out resumes in the company, right? So Kathy, why don't you show them how you're going to solve this?
Yeah, for sure. So with the power of the sensitivity and retention labels, we have to think about how we're bringing data classification to the next level. And you're probably hearing the terms machine learning and AI over and over again. And I want to show you a live demo for how this is going to work here. We've had these regex patterns to identify what's in a document so you can protect it for a while. Everything from credit card numbers to SSNs. You've seen that, you've probably seen the false positives, and you've applied them in various different ways in your DLP policies. Now, with trainable classifiers, what we're bringing is allowing you to train a classifier to protect not just what's in a document, but what the document is. So in order to show a custom one, I'll go through the 3-step process that you would go to be able to train a classifier. Now, you can use this for things such as HR documents, employee agreements, NDA forms. In this example, I'm going to create a trainable classifier on something that is a contract per GDPR regulation. So I'll put in Contoso contracts, maybe put a description if I needed to, and go to next. So this is step 1, in which you would be seeding the machine learning classifier. Now, if we compare the analogy of machine learning to finding a needle in a haystack, this is the portion in which you're telling us what does the needle look like. And so garbage in, garbage out, you want to provide a good set of 50 documents to say, these are all of the documents that I know are contracts. So in a separate SharePoint repository, I prepared a site of documents that I'm going to go ahead and seed the classifier with. So I'll go ahead and do and then that'll start off the process in which you are verifying the site. If the Wi-Fi speed will allow, and it's there. So I'll go ahead and kick off this process. It'll go ahead and ask me to review and finish. Now that'll start off the ingestion process. It's going to start creating a prediction based on a statistical model on all of those documents you just seeded the classifier with. Now I've already prepared one that is in test and review because in progress it'll take a bit of time to build that prediction. And here's the view that you'll see once you first go into the classifier, and then it'll move on to the second step. So in this process, what I want to go ahead and do, if I follow training process, is start to test that model that I just built. I can add items to test in a very similar fashion that I just did with seeding. And this portion is where you would provide 50-50, 80-20, some positives, some negatives, and it'll start testing that against the model. You can see here, it's predicting 200 of those files are relevant, and then the other 26 are not relevant. So that's testing. Third step is going to be review. So I can review items in order to increase the accuracy of this classifier and go into each of these documents and notice how it's predicting the relevance. So for instance, let's say I want to create one for contracts. I can get a source view, look at the contract, and then it'll ask me whether or not I agree or not with this prediction. So it'll review you in batches of 30, and it'll show a spectrum of documents across the machine learning's confidence level, so that while you're starting to review every 30, it'll retrain and recalibrate, and the accuracy will update. So this is the review portion. I'll show you a view of a classifier that is about ready to publish. It's giving it a second to load. All right, I'll hit refresh just really quick so that it'll come back.
So Kathy, are there 2 types of classifiers that you have in the system? Is it out of
Yeah,
the
there
box?
are. So the 2 types, one second, I'll just open these in a new tab so they'll be ready to look at. But the 2 types of classifiers that we have here for machine learning are ones that you can build yourself, And there's also ones that we've already created at the data science team at Microsoft. So those are for things such as resumes, which you mentioned earlier, source code, and offensive language. And you can start using those to detect and protect whatever documents you need to without any seeding or training involved. So again, with this classifier, as I continue reviewing and the accuracy improves, I can also use the Analyze feature. And so what Analyze does is I can look at all of the items that I have reviewed and look at all my true positives, true negatives, false positives, and false negatives to see if there's a trend with how the machine learning is working. And then I can also look at all of the items that are not reviewed and see, hey, for everything that's being predicted negative, am I missing something that is very key and important before I can publish? A published classifier will have this view, and we recommend reviewing and testing at least 200 documents to stabilize the classifier and improve its accuracy. For those of you who are a little more advanced with machine learning, we also provide values for precision and recall, so you can also use those values to help you as you build the accuracy of the model before you publish. I want to show you how the resumes would work if we wanted to follow one of the tips, which is to protect and govern your data. If I go into information protection, I can go ahead and create a label here to say, protect my resumes, and then create a tooltip that says, do not forward or encrypt. One second. Zoom out, hit next. I can even provide encryption, content marking, endpoint data loss prevention. But what I want to key into here is that I can do auto labeling for Office applications and specify that I want to be looking for content that contains a classifier, in which case I want to do that for resumes. So I want to protect all of my resumes by doing this, and I can go ahead and publish this label. So that way, when I'm working on resumes within, let's say, a OneDrive, I can go ahead and open one. And if I have a label policy that has been already created as it renders, it'll go ahead and run the machine learning on this document and see whether or not it needs to apply a label.
Again, this doesn't just work when the document is open, even when things are being edited into the document, even then it's basically learning from that and trying to figure out if it's a resume or a contract or any of the out-of-the-box or custom classifiers.
That's right. If you just give it 1 second. So there's the label applied, and then the policy tip says, hey, we've recognized this is a resume, and it's going to apply a label.
Okay, why don't you hit me 6?
Okay.
So let's say that you went through the process, you've successfully set it up. Now you wanted to understand exactly what's happening in the organization based on the classifier. How is it working? I remember Kathy using confidential doc as the label, which gets applied on that particular document. So let's see what has happened on confidential label. Oh, there you go. So I can see that this specific resume has a label on it called confidential doc, and you can straight away see that in the admin tool. And importantly, going back to the story that I was talking about in Activity Explorer, right? Now, are all the other resumes which are in the company getting labeled before they leave the organization? So let's go figure it out based on something like this, based on a policy that you've set it up. So I know where all my resumes are stored. So I see that, yeah, all the files which are in this location, which people use to communicate with vendors to fill positions, are getting labeled. So I'm happy for these files to leave the organization because I know they are protected. I think that's about it. Any questions? Okay.
Are you saying, will these labels apply for on-prem and also on your network? Yeah.
Okay, so to basically repeat the question, do these classifiers apply only to SharePoint and OneDrive, or does it go into on-prem? To begin with, we are actually looking at Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive. So as a part of the data classification service, we want to take it to on-prem as well.
And we'll finish answering the rest of the questions after the
Probably
session.
after the
Feel
session,
free
so
to
we need
come
to get
up.
out. So
Yeah.
we'll be here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.